Brian, if you can switch slides for me. Thank you. So we're going to have a review of the mission and vision and just do a quick reminder of what this grant is about, what we are doing, and the work that's been done. Tom and Danielle are two folks who sit on a committee with us, and we just wanted to have them reflect on their experience as they work in policy themselves and how this project has been impacting not only their work, but the people that they serve. What has been done so far, this is really the celebration point. There has been a tremendous amount of work that's been done on this grant. We are at the halfway point, and so we'd like to showcase what's already been done. And then Brian Hipsch is going to talk about what's coming up. And I think this is the most important part, and the reason why we gathered everyone here today is to talk about what is coming up in the future for WDQI. A lot of the work has been behind the scenes, it feels like right now, building systems of governance. But moving forward, there might be more requests for participation from your staff as we build capacity to make evidence-based policymaking decisions in the future. We'll talk about those upcoming tasks, and then at the end, I'll just talk about what you can do to share this with your staff. So with that, I think I will kick it all over to Amy, and she's going to talk about the mission and vision. Amy?
Can you see me and hear me?
I can see you and hear you.
Awesome. Thank you, Laura. So since we last talked to everybody, we've been working on better defining our vision that the project's supporting. And we started, some of this vision work started with looking at both outside and inside our agency. And as you can see on the slide in front of you, some of what we're seeing is there's lots of activity that's encouraging more data-driven decisions and program evaluations, as well as better data governance happening outside. The Evidence Act is something I'm going to give a little bit more information about in just a few minutes, but it was signed in 2019. And then the WIOA activities had a much greater emphasis on evaluations, including a really significant overhaul of their performance measures and some of the federal required data gathering on those programs to help align some key data points related to both outcome measures across all of the programs, as well as how to define and capture specific variables that can influence a person's employment experience, things like homelessness or low income. And standardizing these independent, what are called independent and dependent variables at the programmatic level across these programs really helps in cross-program evaluation. And it has really helped us in this project as well. And then another thing that we're seeing outside of Wisconsin is has to do with something called RESEA. And for those of you who are not in the job centers, RESEA is for people who find themselves unemployed and are claiming unemployment. There's a program that's run by our job center staff, and the goal is really to help not only help them understand the work search requirements and how to navigate the unemployment system, but also how to help them navigate to other services available so that we can help reconnect them with employment faster. And one of the things that's happening outside of Wisconsin is the requirements for the funding of that program were released, and they included a requirement that a specific percentage of their service delivery has to either be already established as evidence-based, or it has to be, that service delivery has to be underneath evaluation. And not only did it have to be evidence-based, but that evidence had to meet a specific statistical benchmark to satisfy that funder. And so what that means is that we're seeing in that external outside of Wisconsin impact is that it means our Bureau of Job Service is learning more and more about that formal evaluation process as they're working on implementing those evaluation requirements. Another thing that we're seeing outside of Wisconsin is a general shift around protection of private data. And so in the European Union, we saw the rollout of the General Data Protection Regulations. And in January 2020, we saw the California Consumer Protection Act go into effect. And really what these are to help establish that personal ownership of private data that's held by corporations. And the goal of these laws are really to make that data collection process more transparent, and it gives the person the right to be what's called forgotten, meaning you have the right to not only understand all of the places that hold your private information, including things like what it's used to calculate, but you also have the right to ask them to take you out of their data set. And it's we've always had laws like this related to administrative data, and many of our programs have legislative mandates for data privacy and transparency and data retention rules. In general, what we're seeing outside of Wisconsin is an overall increase in interest in this area about really making sure we protect people's right to privacy when it comes to their data. And then from a perspective of trends within our agency, and they're the same as many of your agencies as well. We have lots of people from different agencies that attended our kickoff and that we've invited to the event today. But similar to other agencies, we have a wealth of this administrative data, and we really want to be able to use it to answer key questions that we have about service delivery so that we can best serve the citizens of Wisconsin. And some of you at the last meeting, we sat down and we were able to, because we were in person, have these small group discussions about questions that we would love to be able to ask and answer that would help drive better service delivery. And what we heard from folks are things that, are our current programs and services effective? What were some of the long-term impacts of our service? And then we also heard questions related to like the system of services. So what was the impact of the system of services? And in some of those small discussion groups, they were also putting it in the context of community or personal health, thinking of employment and workforce solutions being a part of the social determinants of health model, and does better service for employment improve the overall health of a person or a community. And so, we were looking at all of these trends as far as what are people outside of Wisconsin doing, what are people inside of Wisconsin doing. And Brian, I'm going to have you move to the next slide. And then we compared it with what we were doing with the grant. And so in the grant, we had identified that our future goal is to have a goal where DWD really leads with evidence. And the system to help get us there is what we're building right now called the Workforce Data Integration System. And the funding source is the Workforce Data Quality Initiative Grant that we are celebrating the midpoint celebration of that particular grant. And the grant's goal are the 4 items that are up on the screen right now. The first one is to really expand and enhance and take our existing administrative data systems and then do the second thing, make these technical improvements and connections to improve the efficiency and quality of being able to do cross-program and eventually cross-agency reporting. And then some of these technical improvements include the ability to link and deduplicate files, as well as provide what's called shared structure of the data so that we can be able to efficiently run some analysis on that. So an example would be alignment of certain things like time or geography or personal demographics or characteristics about some of these people that are in the different programs. And then the third item was to really establish some good governance and really look at the language that we need to not only connect the data, but also make sure that we're protecting the data as appropriate and being able to ensure that it can be connected and protected while we're answering questions with that information. And so the idea behind this is to be able to collaborate, and it helps us support being action-oriented, to build capacity, and to serve communities with the data that we hold. And so some of the things that are being answered in the governance area is, in addition to some data quality and data overall management, but also how do we select priority questions? Which ones are we going to answer? Which ones are we going to select? And how do we do resourcing to be able to answer them? And how do we ensure that we use the evidence in program design or program decisions? And then also how to make sure that privacy is protected. So not only that the data quality is right, but that privacy is protected. And then the very last step of the grant is really to realize that value. And so we actually have to, what we're calling, proof the system, meaning we have to submit through the processes that we've built and get feedback on and approval for the first research and evaluation question. So forcing us to build for use right out of the box. So that's an overview of what the grant is about that we're here celebrating, the midpoint. Brian, could you go to the next slide? I want to return to the Evidence Act just for a moment. So the Evidence Act was passed in Congress in 2018, and it was signed into law on January 14th, 2019. And what the Evidence Act really establishes is the processes that the federal government is going to use to modernize its data management practices, as well as its evidence building functions and statistical efficiency so that you can use more evidence in policy decisions. The Evidence Act itself contains 4 titles. One is about evidence capacity overall. One is about something called open data. And then we also have data confidentiality section of the Evidence Act. And when you're looking at some of the, how does this impact at the federal level, what we're seeing in the rollout of the required activities are things like having each cabinet level position having what's called a learning agenda. So a strategic planning tool related to what questions you want to focus on as you are working on building evidence, so that you have the right evidence at the right time to make the decisions for your programs. Ellie's going to talk about this in a couple of slides later. And then you have the evaluation plan at the cabinet level positions at the federal level. And that's really your help to organize and leverage the use of not only your data, but also your expertise, and reduce the potential for duplication on major evaluations across the organizations. And we're going to be looking at taking on that in our work over the next year. And then the capacity assessment, which is one of those required activities, is really identifying relative strengths and obstacles, and it's used to really look at how do we do continuous improvement in our overall capacity to build the right evidence at the right time for the right decisions. And then the last required activity at the federal level is what's called a federal data catalog. And this is really to make sure that inventories are published and that it's easier to request data at the federal level with the goal of driving more potential for external and internal partnerships and bring more capacity to the overall system at the federal level of building evidence. If you can go to the next slide, please, Brian. What the Evidence Act really gives us is it gives us a roadmap. It provides us not only the tools that we need, we can really use them for not only what's in the legislation, but also their implementation guides and their playbooks and their examples of how to do these things. But it also gives us a blueprint for action. It's already established shared language across the different federal department level silos. And it allows us to prepare for what is probably going to come to many of our programs over the years. The first one that we're seeing the action from a federal agency to a state agency is, like I had said, in that RESCA program where the job center staff are serving some of the unemployment claimants. So our goal was really to make sure that we could use that as a roadmap. Brian, if you could go to the next slide. So when we're thinking about what is our vision as a state that we were, as DWD that we were establishing within this project is we started with some research to think about what had to be in this vision. And so some of the key components that we found in our work is that in order to be evidence-based, you have to have action where questions are driving evidence and evidence is driving decisions. You also need to make sure you've got the right rules in place. This is critical about having the governance of the data, including both ethical and appropriate use of the data. And then you had to have capacity was key, is what we found in the research. Without capacity, you can't answer the questions, and you definitely can't answer them on time for decisions to be made. And so you had to find a way to leverage what you already had and be able to build partnerships for some of the data you needed or some of the expertise and tools that are needed to be able to make this happen. And these included both internal and external partners. And then we also found another key component is that communities had to remain central. So innovation requires that community voice and that community partnership. And without that, we wouldn't be successful. So if you combine these key components that we found, Brian, if you can go to the next slide, please. With some of what we heard were some of the key business ideas. So things like all of the folks that we talked to in our stakeholder meetings wanted to get better at connecting the dots, using the data, driving decisions with data. Our stakeholders also told us that being person-centered was really key to our business model, that equity has always mattered and will continue to matter and had some priorities around it right now. And then we also heard from our business stakeholders that they wanted us to follow the federal model because it was available to us and a lot of our programs were structured underneath that federal model. So what that resulted in is the vision statement that we've come up with for the project. And Brian, if you can go to the next. So this is our DWD vision of the future, and it's about evidence, that this DWD evidence-based future vision. And so it is, we will base programs, policies, and service delivery on evidence, which means that we will define and state the problem and use evidence to solve it. And if that evidence doesn't exist, we'll build it and then measure our experience to adjust as needed. And we'll use the tools from the Evidence Act to help us organize this and to build those partnerships. That we will understand the system's impact. So we'll be able to identify and describe how a single person is served by the system, and then investigate how those services interact and collectively interact to impact the person's outcome, and then leverage the knowledge of those results from those impact analyses. And that can include internal changes in our program delivery, as well as push for external changes when appropriate. And really understanding and improving equity of our system is a critical component of understanding that impact of the system. The next one is to leverage and manage DWD's collective data and build evidence efficiently to improve person-centered outcomes. So really thinking about building evidence effectively as a team. So being able to leverage our administrative data and use data partnerships for data that we don't hold, and then leverage statistical and evaluation expertise, both internally and externally, and then help our leaders make data partnerships easier by providing training on terminology and concepts of data sharing. And then because we're sharing and we're leveraging data, this means that data quality and enforcement of standards are going to be more important than ever, as well as privacy and protection rules. And then thinking about this all as a big coordinated effort so that we can make that happen together. And then the last one is really building to make data available for internal and external use. And how it's used is to help define and implement better service for citizens in our communities. Communities should have a right, and we should help convene partnerships at the local level so that we can find solutions at the local level to meet local area needs. Not only are the people unique in those local areas, but also the systems they live in have a local uniqueness as well. And so really working with them and helping establish partnerships and convening partnerships at that local level. So part of our midpoint celebration is to say what we've done, and part of that has been a better definition of our vision, and Brian's going to take over in a few minutes to cover more as we go on. But first I want to invite two members from our team to come forward for us not only to recognize them, and as well as recognize they represent a whole bunch of other people, so we're just going to have two talk today, but they represent others that have been working on the project. And for them to share a little bit about what they've been learning in this process and how it relates to their involvement or work that they normally do, and how it helps them in their current role and impacts our customers or outcomes. So Tom, I'm going to invite you to come forward for a few words.
So I'm Tom Walsh, and I'm a regional labor market economist. And I've been lucky enough to be part of this group, and I've really appreciated all the effort that's been done to really do this right. There's a lot of organizations that really kind of put this kind of thing off until it's too late, or until they have to do it really on the fly. And I can't say how much I've enjoyed really building this from the ground up, instead of trying to do it when it's a little bit too late to go to do it, or when we're really in a high need for having to do an initiative like this. Along with that, just as a labor market economist, and just seeing the way that the economy is changing and advancing, I'm really excited to see how we're able to use this data and how to be able to use the final product of this initiative to improve the ways that we're supporting and empowering our workforce and helping to advance our economy in Wisconsin. And with that, I'll turn it over to Danielle.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Danielle Russell. I'm a quality assurance analyst in vocational rehabilitation. And I'll mirror a little bit of what Tom said. It is really exciting to be part of this shift to evidence-based policymaking at DWD. This is the kind of thinking that was behind the creation of my quality assurance position in 2019 at DVR, for DVR to have dedicated staff working on creating processes for gathering data regarding efficiency and effectiveness of current policies and practices and around program outcomes. And DVR is also currently sponsoring my participation in a program evaluation and quality assurance certificate program to learn techniques to gather evidence and use research to drive decision making. So I'm working to promote those practices in my program evaluation and quality assurance groups within DVR, and I'm excited to be a part of the effort to do the same on a larger scale for DWD. This is something that will affect the agency at every level, and it's a pretty big and exciting project. In spring 2018 in DVR, we did state interviews with staff, and one of the things that we learned from those interviews is that our staff want to be able to see more tangible representations of progress and success to stay engaged. And so it's exciting that we can use data from evidence-based decision-making efforts. They don't only show us what services are most effective, but they also show us the value of our services and the impact that we're having on our consumers or clients, customers, whatever we call them. So we can use this data to look forward and direct our funds to the most effective services and promote practices that best serve our customers and lead to the outcomes we want to see. But we can also use it to celebrate program success and provide validation of our hard work to improve outcomes for Wisconsinites. And with that, I will turn it over to Brian.
Go ahead, Brian. I just needed to get our applause in there. We have to remember it's a celebration.
Thank you. As mentioned earlier, the WDQI project is more than a single research project. It is a sustained system that will allow multiple questions about our programs to be asked and answered in an efficient manner. This type of system requires a lot of initial effort, planning, and coordination. The diverse set of data and data sources in DWD requires formal documentation and processes. Those become necessary to sustain the effort long term. During the first half of the project, many of the basic planning elements were completed. Some have even been enacted. Many of the foundational actions to allow WDIS to begin were completed earlier in 2020. The most consequential was the hiring of 2 data stewards. These positions are the primary workforce behind the project. Dr. Ellie Hartman, who you will hear from later, acts as the Chief Evaluation Officer. I act as the Chief Data Officer of the WDIS. Many of the other work products are in draft, ready to be reviewed by the WDIS's governing body. From the operations manual, committee structure, proposed metrics, and a multitude of trainings are all supporting documentations that will provide the structure and readiness for the system to provide value. You may notice the analogy I am using on the slide. It is the runner who is halfway through the race, doing very well, but is coming up on a big hill towards the end. There wasn't an evil race director who did that to us in WDIS. The structure of the project was the consequence of building long-term and sustainable capacity from the very little that existed. This is why the foundational work items were done first, and they set the table before tackling many of those larger items. The two projects that are in progress and I will focus on here are the LWD Data Dictionary and the Longitudinal Workforce Database itself. The Learning Agenda is also in progress, but I will have Dr. Hartman, who is leading that initiative, speak to it later. The LWD Data Dictionary is a document that is intended to be the authority document for understanding what data is in the LWD. The two WDIS data stewards are working on the format and in conjunction with the Data Steward Committee to confirm the accuracy of the documents. The actual definitions are beginning to be generated, and as the construction of the LWD progresses, we'll have more definitions and data structure to put into that dictionary. The data dictionary should be completed by the middle of 2021. The Longitudinal Workforce Database recently began its development. The database's structure and initial construction are underway. This is the critical artifact of the WDQI grant that will provide the technical solution to provide individual data from multiple sources to provide that 360-degree view of an individual's experience and outcomes with DWD's workforce programs. On the right side of the screen, you will see the upcoming tasks that are up the hill that we are running. The tasks are crucial to guarantee the long-term success of the system. In the upcoming slides, I will discuss many of the tasks in more detail. We may need your help on many of them. Let's go to slide 11. Let's start with WDIS's governing body, the ITMB, that's the Information Technology Management Board. This body will need to stand up by the end of 2021. There is a strategic planning and governance team that has been working with DWD's Deputy Secretary since the beginning of the grant. Deputy Secretary Cherry received his first briefing this past June and has been leading this effort to transform the ITMB from an information technology sharing venue to a governing body of department-wide initiatives. The members of the ITMB are very successful at leading their divisions and programs. However, the degree of difficulty and coordination is raised considerably when governing something like WDIS, because there is a need to lead a joint venture such as a board of directors would. The strategic planning and governing team is striving to support this process by empowering ITMB to have the capacity to lead such an endeavor. It will support strategic planning, operational prioritization, and resource allocation. It will develop and outfit the ITMB with the processes to provide authority and conflict resolution. Finally, ITMB will become a driver of the department's culture change, specifically culture consistent with the vision statement. Well, please do not be concerned. We are not trying to change DWD's strong culture of mission, passion, and concern for those we serve. The culture we are referring to here pertains to data use. The small actions that we need staff to consider in using evidence in their policymaking, staff having an appreciation of data collection, and gaining the analytic skills to enable data to help drive those decisions. Longitudinal Workforce Database is the key tool coming out of the WDQI grant. This is the technical link between the warehouses that make up the WDIS. The challenge of the LWD is to build it in a well-structured, well-documented way that is efficient for research purposes. DWD's data is structured in diverse ways in many disparate data sources. The LWD construction project will pull these together in a way that will allow efficient calling of the data necessary for an approved research question. There are many players involved in the making of a complex system like the LWD work. Following the downstream of the data, people from the source systems, to security officers, to the end user advisory team, who is the research and evaluation team, they will all play a significant role in the construction of the LWD. The data dictionary is the source of information about what the LWD provides. The data dictionary ensures proper metadata is available to inform the data users what they are getting from the LWD. The data dictionary will ensure DWD data is understood so that when it is used in evaluation projects, the outcomes are not interpreted in inappropriate ways, and therefore decisions are made. When decisions are made, they are not based on inappropriate conclusions. The dictionary will be robust and will include many people who work on and understand the source systems from where the data is drawn from. We all know of examples of information or data tools that began but did not last for long, and there are several reasons. Perhaps the tool could not have been sustained because of the lack of funding, the absence of proper use agreements, or just straight up the lack of use. The long-term sustainment aspects of these projects is a critical component to ensure DWD maximizes its return on investment from these projects. The sustainment projects will provide the long-term plans to ensure the product is available and continue to be used. A sustainment project has already been initiated for the IBM Identity Insight tool. That is a tool that is a means to conduct the entity matching for the LWD. That's how we know John Smith in one program is John E. Smith in a different program. The results of these long-term documents and products will be stored on the DWD Enterprise SharePoint site with other shared data sources, and this will be a department-wide resource to locate information about the shared data systems and solutions, so we don't have to chase down that documentation later. Finally, the WDIS will be proofed with an actual research project. This project will be initiated during the grant period. The analysis may happen after the grant period. However, the project's flow through the process will provide an opportunity to answer the necessary questions about our DWD programs and provide a mechanism to test the entire WDIS system. The WDIS includes the technical solution, that's the LWD, but it also includes a governing structure that will ensure the data is trusted, understood, secure, and accessible for those authorized purposes. The WDIS governing structure will also ensure the system is aligned with program evidence needs, and that is done through learning agendas. Ellie Hartman will now discuss how the WDIS learning agenda is being built for the WDQI project.
Thanks, Brian. So right now, the research and evaluation team has been working really hard on using information from the Evidence Act and tools developed at the federal level to develop the learning agenda. And basically what the learning agenda is really providing an outline of priority learning questions that really come from the mission and priorities of the department. So we're looking at the DWD mission, the WIOA state plan to really guide, and then also experts from the different areas across the department in research, evaluation, and data and performance, and to identify those priority questions using those tools within those goal areas, learning goal areas, and then looking at across a 4-year period, what are those priority learning goals that we want to tackle, and how might we be able to logistically do that within that time frame? It's kind of a 50,000-foot view of where we're going. So we're working on that. We've gotten pretty far, and we'll definitely get into more detail of those different learning questions and areas, and how and be asking all of you for feedback on whether that's reflecting department-wide goals and your program-specific goals. If you learn more about these areas, is this going to help you as a program make more evidence-based policy making, both on a programmatic level, but then also on an operational or staffing level? So that's something to look forward to, and know that you're going to hear more about and be asked about for feedback, because the better we can develop that learning agenda, the better use we'll make of the tools that we're building and the governance structure that we're building, which will lead us to even better evidence-based policy making and practice moving forward.
Finish us up here with our call to action. We are halfway through the grant period, and as you saw coming is more involvement with your staff. I think sharing this information with them, having them begin to become data literate, understand what evidence-based policymaking is and what that entails, and how we can handle, respect, and use data in the future, is all ways that staff can become involved and included in this project. I know, for example, we'll be having a training hosted by Brian and Ellie next Friday called What is Evidence-Based Policymaking? And I can share that invite with everyone on this call, and feel free to share it with your staff. Whether you're at DWD or not, I think that this is really valuable information to have as we start to collaborate as partners and use data together. Like I said, the chain of communication is really important. Some of you, maybe some of you rather than others, will have to reach out to your staff and include them in some projects. We want to make sure that they're informed when that happens so that there's no surprises. With that, there's no questions in the chat box. As always, you can shoot an email over. I believe there's, Brian, is there another slide? Any questions can be sent to the WDIS mailbox, or you can give Brian Hitch a call on Skype. But we will be having another one of these get-togethers in April where we'll discuss the learning agenda, and hopefully, if we are still remote, can do some breakout sessions using the WebEx technology. So thanks everyone for joining us. We appreciate your participation, your engagement in this project, and let's give it up for our, I have to do it, let's give it up for our presenters. I hope you're all clapping at home, cheering at home, and celebrating, because this really is a great milestone, and thank you all for your help getting us here. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.